Welcome to the very first episode of Death Taxes Acid with Kris Holland. I first met Kris when he hired me for my first job as an Unreal Engine developer, and I learned quickly that he is an exceptionally sharp individual with a high degree of knowledge in many domains. I deeply respect his tech industry insights rooted in thorough research and sound ethics, so I thought it appropriate that he would be the first guest. Please enjoy the conversation with Kris Holland. All right, Kris, thanks for joining me today. We are going to call this the first episode of Death Taxes Acid. So thank you to any probably non-existent audience tuning in. I'll just talk as though there is one, just because probably good practice. Why don't we start with your professional background and any interests you have as an introductory kind of topic?
Sure. So I've got a bit of an eclectic background. Most of my career has been as a computer animator, modeler, focusing on engineering, technology, that sort of thing. I have a Master of Engineering that I got for fun a few years ago. That sort of highlights that skill set. And so most of what I've done in the past is focused on bridging the gap between engineers that are working on new ideas and the public, whether that's leadership, investors, or the general public. I've been an illustrator for Popular Science magazine, popular photography, and my art has been on probably every TV station you can think of at some point or other. And along the way, I've developed a few technologies. I invented a mosquito trap once, and I developed a technology for scanning the real world and putting it into VR, which is obviously where you and I met, Shay.
Yep.
And I've spent a lot of time trying to understand technology. I think of myself as a polymath. I am somebody who likes to learn, who likes to do new things. Occasionally do some writing, occasionally um, do creative things just for the sake of it. I guess that sums me up in a nutshell.
Cool. Do you consider yourself an artist primarily then?
I struggle with that because as an artist, when I look at my art, I don't see my art as being wildly good compared to a lot of what's out there. Um, because I focus on that sort of technical point of view, that I
Uh-huh.
consider myself, an engineering grade artist where I'm able to understand what an engineer needs and create an image from, a brief conversation or a napkin sketch that conveys exactly what that engineer was looking to explain in a way that not just the engineer understands it, right? Which is a relatively rare skill set. So, I mean, yes, I am an artist, but it's sort of part of the whole versus the defining factor.
But it sounds like there's probably a lot of room for creativity in that process,
Oh, for
right?
sure. And like I like to invent things. I like to find solutions to problems. It all involves creativity, and whether it's an artistic pursuit or not, the idea of finding the unknown, exploring the unknown is part of everything that I do.
Yeah. I guess I think it sounds like there's some artwork in that. You're not necessarily doing that whole artist thing where you're like channeling your feelings into your work, really, are you? Like,
No, no, I
yeah,
like that really speaks to the technical aspect. Like the
yeah,
technical aspect doesn't tend to have a really strong point of view. Like
yeah,
you're trying to sell the idea. The idea
yeah.
is the one that's supposed to be conveyed. But I mean, at the same time, I do have an emotional engagement with what I'm doing. I'm
Okay,
interested in the I get energy from the excitement of the person that I'm working with.
okay,
And engineers are often portrayed as being, very cold, very
yeah,
to the point, but they're very passionate people for the most part, like we all are. And hearing an engineer be excited about their new
yeah.
idea, be able to help them bring it from this idea that they have to something that they can actually get money for is a really cool experience.
That's cool. That's really cool. Um, okay, so you like to
you put a lot of comments and critiques in the AI space. So I wanted to get into that because I think you have a lot of interesting things to say about AI. So when it comes to AI, why don't we like kind of start generally here? Like, do you have any thoughts on this current state of the AI market and like the kind of big products? Like, I think, like you said, so like two big ones right now, ChatGPT and Claude, right?
Yeah.
So I recently went from ChatGPT to Claude. Someone recommended I switch, trying to use it. I don't my main use is for coding. And one of your comments is if I had GPT-4 from a year ago, I'd still be using it and would even pay more for it. Do you want to
Right.
like explain that comment?
Yeah, so first of all, I should say that I'm not an AI expert. I'm not a technical expert in the field. I am, you see a lot of things on LinkedIn of people saying, "Oh, well, here's the next thing. Wait for all the experts to come out of the woodwork." But at the same time, AI is something that I have been thinking about for
Yeah.
decades.
Yeah.
As I've always been really into science fiction and consider myself a bit of a philosopher in how technology
Yeah.
impacts society. And so when I speak of what I'm speaking of, I'm speaking it from that perspective of somebody who has thought about it, somebody who is both worried about its impacts, but also optimistic towards what it could
Yeah.
represent. What I
So
meant to,
so 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 just to quickly kind
yeah,
of clarify my thinking on that, it's like I'm not looking for an expert opinion sort of thing. I'm
yeah,
looking for someone who's done the work. Like you have spent a lot of time. You look at other people who know maybe more than you absorb that, and then you think about it. That's what I'm interested in here with your comments and stuff,
for sure.
you
And
know?
and I the only reason I say it is because a lot of people go out there saying and talking like they are experts
Yeah,
without qualifying their perspective, right?
right.
And and,
That's
and
good. Yeah, fair, fair.
Yeah, and so saying that, one of the reasons that I say that GPT from a year ago was better was that I think each individual response had more compute available to it. So it felt like a more, shall we say, thought out answer. But also the technology honestly seemed better that most of the last year on the part of OpenAI and arguably all of the other players has been more about improving the cost effectiveness of running the systems
Okay.
because running these LLMs is expensive.
Yeah.
Like especially when you consider the last version, at least the last version that I used, I don't even know if they've come out with a new one yet, but GPT 4.0, that it was very, very fast, but it, while it clearly, everybody said it made the benchmarks better, it was better than GPT-4, it was better than this, better than that, it felt stupider. And I've never felt that these systems felt incredibly intelligent.
Yeah.
But for a time they were very useful. And I had the opportunity to beta test custom instructions before they were publicly available. And at that time, because it was a beta test, I don't know for sure because they never actually told me, but I think that it was a separate instance running on separate hardware. So it had more space and it was as transformative as it was when I first used GPT 3.5. Like, wow, this is different. This is exciting. This is actually useful. Like 3.5 eventually, like very quickly became, oh, this isn't, it seemed more than it was at first, but GPT-4 custom instructions beta was, I wouldn't say I felt like I was talking to an equal, but it felt like I was talking to somebody that had a point of view that could understand what I was asking it and give me valuable information. And then the beta ended, and it's like it had half of its brain ripped out.
Hmm.
And then as we've gone along, it's just got dumber and dumber and dumber. And I think part of
Yeah.
it, not that the capability of the model is necessarily dramatically less, it's more the fact that because they are A, cutting corners for speed, and B, doing a lot of things to try and limit hallucinations and limit all of the potentially bad things that it can say. All those things have a lot of unintended consequences,
Yeah.
sort of, shave off the edge of the intelligence. So,
Yeah.
we might have this angular, potentially unfortunate intelligence talking to you that can give you really good information. You end up with this blob that can tell you
Yeah.
nothing good. And, you say to it, oh, well, talk to me in a conversational format. Of course, absolutely, I can do that. And then immediately gives you a list. No,
Yeah.
no,
Yeah.
I will
Oh,
say, and it gives you a list,
yeah.
and the list
Yeah.
is
Yeah.
highly generalized.
Yeah.
And so you end up spending all of your time trying to get it to give you good information,
Yeah.
and so you end up sort of walking around the point you're trying to get
Yeah.
to, and you never get there. And it's like, okay,
Yeah.
this is just absolutely frustrating, and it came to the point where it's just like, this is a waste of my money, and I stopped
Yeah.
paying.
So tell me, how do you engage with it in a way? So there's actually a couple things here. So firstly, how do you personally test it so that you're saying like, oh, it was great, and then it gets updated and it sucks? What are you doing to see that change? Like, give me an example about how do you like, how are you pushing it? How are you testing its boundaries and whatever, right?
Right, right.
Second, can you say for everyone, the non-existent audience and myself, technically, what are they doing? Do you know what they're doing? Because do you know what they're doing from a technical perspective?
Yeah.
And also, is this related to your comments about Claude being, oh no, it's all in the same thing there. Claude being recently lobotomized or whatever.
Yeah. So
So yeah.
so yeah, I'll start with the technical side. So my understanding of how it works is not deeply technical, in the sense I'm not going to be the guy who goes out and builds a model. I'm not going to be the guy who trains the
Yeah.
model. And I would say, like all the technology that I understand, it's at a higher level, like it's almost intuitive.
Yeah.
And so I can't speak to the specific technical
Right.
aspect,
Right.
but I understand, like, the way inferencing works, in the sense of, like, it builds a relationship between this idea and that idea, and it
Okay.
can replicate as it's thinking.
Okay.
And it's not predicting the next thought as much as it is predicting the next word. And
Right.
previously it would, like, and there's weights that sort of pressure it to go towards one side. So talk more about, fluffy bunnies than talking about explosives,
Yeah.
and so all of those things are sort of pushing it in directions of what its creators think are the right things.
Uh-huh.
So, just like humans, if you try and, I struggle because, on the one hand, I agree with a lot of what Elon Musk says about politically correctness. I just think the way he applies it is horrible. Um, and that as soon as you try to excessively restrict thought, you are not going to make correlations that might be obvious and beneficial, right? Because the same thought that goes to doing really bad things can actually end up at a solution that's really good for people. But if you're not willing to at least look in that direction, you're not going to see that path.
Yeah.
And when I talked about Claude being lobotomized, it was that one day it went from being what everybody was used to doing to clearly not thinking the same way, but being a lot faster. So, again, same thing with GPT 4.0, is they're making changes to make it faster, which is taking out sections of intelligence without necessarily knowing what the long-term consequences are to its ability to think. So from my perspective, the way that I'm testing it is having, I think most of the conversations that I have are non-standard, right? So I'm thinking about whatever the latest thing that comes across my mind is, and asking questions. And, what if we do this, and what if we do that, and what if we do the other thing? Not necessarily structured, not necessarily intentional. And, I've got a lot of expertise, and, being a polymath means learning about as much as you can. So I'll ask it an engineering question, I'll ask it a philosophy question, I'll ask it an art question. And I'm once I get an answer, then I try and dig deeper into that answer until it's clearly that it starts going in a loop. So, early GPT, I could get 6 or 7 prompts deep and still be getting interesting information, and it felt like I was going somewhere. Now with all of the AIs, Claude is the best one, but all of them, it's like second or third prompt, you're looping back to the beginning and starting to argue with it about, a direction. And like for me, the way that I want to use it is I have an idea. I don't know a lot about that subject matter. I don't even know what search terms to use if I want to put it into a search engine. So I say, tell me about this. And it gives me a bunch of information. And so now, okay, now I know a little bit, and I can use that to ask more informed questions. And until I have a broad enough understanding that I can go off to a search engine or other literature and actually learn about the real thing, because I'm not going to rely on an LLM for actual real information.
Yeah,
But
of course.
it sort of gives me that umbrella starting point, so that way I'm not completely ignorant to the terms of use within a field or an idea. And now I'm at the point where I'm not using anything very much because I'm just not getting that kind of information out of it anymore. And for me, that's one of the places where it really showed intelligence, is that it could give me information that I didn't already know. And now it's just handing me stuff that I already knew. It's like, okay, well, what's the point of this? You know?
Yeah, so the way I see it is I'm using it. My main use for it is coding. And I can't tell if I just got better at coding over the last year, which I certainly have, or it's just started to like suck. So like when I was, sort of doing a lot more learning about a year ago, like GPT-4 was like a godsend, like an absolute godsend. Today, Copilot is like, I'm like half the time, I'm like, what the fuck are you doing? Like simple stuff, it's not getting right.
Yeah.
And Claude, I sometimes I'm like, oh my God, thank you for this. Other times I'm like, I'm getting suspicious about it. And it's not super like I'm working with harder problems than I was a year ago. And my suspicion is now that like AI is only really useful for like lower level problems that like a junior to mid-level developer is going to be working on. But I think as soon as you get to like the hard stuff that like a senior is focusing on, forget about it. It's not going to help you. The only help that it does is this is still a big help, which is like I don't have to worry about shit like syntax. Like that is like useless. As a programmer, I don't want to think about syntax. I don't want to think about the
I'm thinking about logic.
curly braces and like semicolons,
Yeah.
so it takes away that, and like I do not ever think of that, and that's like awesome. Like I'm sure there's developers through the ages wish they had AI for that alone. I have no
Yeah,
doubt
but
about it.
I think what I was saying earlier about the idea of there being less compute available to each individual answer. I think that's part of the reason why the coding's getting worse as well. That I've messed around with the coding and got, this was early on. I was getting decent results, but incredibly frustrated because when I started, I didn't know what I was doing, and then very quickly I started to get, okay, I kind of understand what's going on. And so where at first it gave me a good answer and I asked it to fix something, and I could see immediately that it botched it. Like it would change variable names halfway through, and
Yeah,
it would create a function,
yeah,
and then it would change the function's outputs without actually changing the way it worked in the rest of the program. So it would immediately break it. And like it served to very, very quickly, like you say, bring me from zero to, not zero.
yeah,
And almost immediately it was like, yeah, this is getting more and more useless with time.
right.
And so, like you say, I would use it to rough draft a because like I did my first time through university, I tried to do computer science, and I didn't know at the time that I was dyslexic. and that dyslexia makes coding very, very difficult,
Yeah, I can
especially
imagine.
like this is when we were coding on stone tablets, right? So forgetting a semicolon was a big thing.
Yeah.
um Having that ability to have it rough draft and have most of the structure there means, okay, I can go in, I can make changes, and that in those early days, like I could so see the potential. And for all of what's happened in the last 2 years, like there's so much potential in what these systems can do, but so much money has rushed into, oh, let's just make another version of an LLM chatbot to do something else that's equally useless as the last one,
Yeah.
versus actually new ideas to actually do real things that are actually really useful. Like Copilot is a terrible implementation by one of the world's biggest companies. Like
Yeah.
what was Microsoft has the people, it has the tech, it has everything you need to do something good, and Copilot is garbage.
Yeah.
Whether it's Copilot on GitHub or in Word and Excel, like every time I use it, it's like, okay, it's clearly bolted on, and it was bolted on for the sake of bolting it on, not for actually giving any value to the user.
Right.
It was so that we could say, yes, it's AI powered, which is
Right. Right.
a
Right.
meaningless term when the technology doesn't actually do anything.
Gotcha. So I use Copilot again just for coding, and it's useful. It's been pissing me off lately. I've been even debating canceling it, but it's 10 bucks a month, so like whatever. But I haven't tried it in like say Word where you'd expect something decent. So like why don't you tell me how have you tried using it in say Word, and like why does it suck versus how do you see it being actually useful in something like everyday office use or whatever, right?
Right. So the way they've implemented and I haven't used it in 2 or 3 months, so it's possible it's been updated.
Yeah.
But that said, like you have a side panel window, which is just, instead of having a browser window next to your office window, it's built in where you
Okay.
can chat with Copilot just like you would GPT. I
Yeah.
mean, it's a neutered version of GPT.
Okay.
And then when you're starting a new document or whatever, you can give it a prompt and it'll write a paragraph for your document. But the thing is, if you highlight something and rewrite this, you can't do that.
Oh, really?
Let's have a conversation about this. No, you have to copy it and then paste it into the other window. And it's like
That's ridiculous.
all of the implementations are, I'll just use GPT, which is less stupid than Copilot or
Right.
another
Right.
entirely, versus this implementation and implementing Gemini into Sheets or Docs is exactly the same. Like it does not have the kind of interaction. Like what I would really like to see, like ChatGPT has, like on the phone app, you have the ability to talk to it.
Yes.
And like I'd like to have the ability to talk with my document, saying, or talk with Copilot, saying, okay, well, we have this at this paragraph. Can you change this?
Right.
Like I have, because I like what I had done is I was trying to structure a bunch of my ideas. So I created this, and I was using GPT, and I used GPTs, the implementation where you can actually upload documents and have a conversation with the documents. So I was conversating with the document in GPT, get it to write a structure, put it in the document, re-upload it. So it was like this really complicated loop of building.
Okay. Okay.
But I was able to fairly, because that's what I was hoping Copilot would be, except more efficient, and it wasn't.
Right.
But so
Right.
I was building out this document and having, more and more complete conversations about these ideas, because now it had access to this history, right? And but it was really awkward, really time consuming. And then at some point you hit the limit of what GPT could remember at the time. So then it would start forgetting things. And it's like, and then it was just start making stuff up, and it would get more and more frustrating along the way. But so I have this, okay, I think it was like a 90-page document that I created with GPT. And what I was hoping Copilot would do is like, okay, I have 3 sections about this topic. Let's merge them together. Couldn't do that. I'd like to be able to, I know I talked about X, Y, or Z. Go and add this. No, can't do that. Well, can you change this? No, you can't do that. It's like everything I asked it to do, it
Yeah.
couldn't do.
Yeah.
All the things that would make it a useful assistant in
Right.
Word, it
Right.
cannot do.
Right.
So why is it there?
Right. Right.
Why would
Right.
like I don't pay for it because it's useless.
Yeah. Right. So, that kind of brings to the whole thing where there seems to be this like hype kind of cycle thing with tech. It's like the new tech comes out and everyone's like gets all hyped up about it, and then it's like it just kind of like it wears off. Everyone gets
Yeah,
used to
well,
it, and
it
then
is. So
you're
the
like,
hype cycle's a thing, but the way that it works in tech is it's extra stupid because what happens is a new technology comes along, everybody gets excited about that new technology, and they immediately, all the investors check their brain at the door,
yeah,
and then they go and say, okay, well, I've got 1 million, 100 million, 1 billion, whatever stupid amount of money, and I'm going to throw it at the first thing that says AI.
yeah, 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 yeah,
And so you end up inflating all these companies that don't have products. They might have a piece of technology, but they don't have a product. They don't have something that is actually valuable to anyone, but they're getting tons of money. And so they're developing their technology, not developing an audience, not developing
yeah,
a consumer base. And all of this is happening in many, many, many different companies. And so all of these things, like, because they're like, now we're trillions of dollars into this. And all the investors are realizing, hey, wait a second, we're not making any money, and there's no money to be made. There are no products. So inevitably, what's going to happen is that this bubble is going to burst. All of these companies are just going to disappear as all the money's yanked out. But there are actually products out there. It's just they're buried in the sea and
yeah,
of noise and garbage that's out there. And I'm not saying that they don't exist. They might exist, or they might not exist. It could be that almost all of this is just hype. But I
yeah,
mean, companies like OpenAI and whatever else, they're feeding into it because they're making bank, right?
yeah,
And companies like Google are stepping in it at every turn because big companies like Google and Microsoft are not good at pivoting. And so they're trying their damnedest, and they step in it at every other um step, and end up making really bad decisions that makes it look even worse,
yeah,
right? When Google's basically the one that developed most of this technology in the first place. If they had, you know, just gone forward and done what Google does best, it probably would have been halfway decent. But then they suddenly realized, oh my God, we're behind, and then they rushed into it and they fell flat on their face.
yeah. So I guess that's probably related to another one of your comments, which is that you say the problem is that they never lose. They run when their money is amplified, saving themselves to chase the next thing, leaving others who can less afford it to suffer the implosion of reality. The rich become richer and everyone else bears the brunt. In the process, we push ourselves one step closer to the brink. So the first thing is that I think is this not sort of a built-in feature of, say, capitalism? It's called the creative destruction, I think, right? Like,
Yeah, well, I mean,
because you have to
yes,
you have to fail, have to have a ton of businesses fail and products to fail to find the
yeah.
like small handful that does reach the market and scale properly and provide value
I
to
think that's a
everyone.
bit of a false perspective because what I think that exists because the people who have the money don't have the technical prowess to understand, right? So the only way that they can find the winner is by throwing money at a bunch of them, and
Right.
1 out of 10 succeeds,
Yeah,
and
yeah, 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 yeah.
that one is going to succeed enough to pay for the other failures. Well, I don't think it needs to be that way.
Okay.
If I've seen technical investors who actually know their stuff go out, and they'll be very careful in what they invest in, and what they invest in might not be a unicorn. It might
Yeah.
not make a million times, but it will be successful, and they will make their money, and
Yeah.
they're involved in their investment, making it better, and it's worthwhile. And then
Okay.
you have the VCs who are just going out and throwing money in every direction, and they're the ones that are doing all this inflation, investing in all these companies. And the perception of AI is it's hugely expensive because you need to buy 100,000 H100s or whatever, and in order to be able to make a go of it, so you need a couple billion to start, and so that just amplifies the problem that's always existed within these investment circles.
Right.
And I think that it's not inevitable, it's not required, but the goal of fast money, next quarter we need to double our money.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Get our
That,
investment
that's
back
that's the
and shit.
problem.
Right.
It's high speed greed that is the problem, right?
Yeah.
And,
Yeah,
and
yeah, yeah.
so it amplifies whatever structural problems exist within the market. And I mean, the fact is that, I mean, you throw that kind of money around, there's charlatans and snake oil salesmen who are there for you. You want to give me $1 million for nothing?
Yeah, that's
I'll,
true. That's
like,
true.
I'm not that guy. That's why I've never been able to explode in wealth, because I'm not willing to say that I'm going to offer you the world and take your money and laugh as I
Yeah,
walk away.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
But there's a lot of people who will, and that's what creates these environments. So, like, capitalism, I'm not an anti-capitalist,
Yeah.
because I think capitalism has a lot of potential, a lot of power to do a whole lot of good. It's just
Yeah.
unfettered, stupid capitalist. It's like unfettered, stupid anything,
Yeah.
right? It's going to have consequences and head down bad roads that are gonna um, ultimately screw us all one way or another,
Yeah.
right? Whether it's because it's sucking all the oxygen out of the room. So, like, right now, anybody who has a genuinely good idea, good luck getting any money for it.
Right.
Or creating, these technological white elephants that are consuming enormous amounts of power, which is creating, all these greenhouse emissions and heat emissions and all the secondary and tertiary consequences that come from that. And don't care. It's going to fail and they're going to go do it again.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
the consequences that we as a people have to soak up are the fact that our environment is continuing to degrade. Whether or not you believe in climate change, the fact is the climate is changing.
Yeah.
And if we don't adapt to it,
Yeah.
then it's going to be a really bad day for us as a species.
Yeah.
And, that there's not a lot of profit and money to be made in adapting to change. And unless, in this case, people think, oh, well, I can make $100 million by jumping on this change. Well, it's not the
Yeah.
right one. And right now,
Yeah.
it doesn't have a long game that actually is going to see it. But the thing is, like what I was saying in that quote is that, somebody comes in, they invest $100 million, they pump it up, they pump it up, they pump it up, pull the money out before the bubble bursts, and then, basically selling it to the next guy who doesn't know any better. And then the market falls out, and those guys who don't have nearly as much to lose
Yeah.
everything. All the initial guys made a fortune.
Yeah. So there are times though when it's like it, it does align with like things that help the species, right? So like I've been hearing from the start a lot about, because you mentioned the climate change stuff and the environmental stuff. Like I've been hearing a lot about the energy applications, right? So my understanding is that AI can, and it probably exists now. Someone is surely working on it. AI can produce enormous gains in energy consumption just from like my understanding is that you can just by getting it to micromanage each like node of use, where it's like if I were to have my phone basically hooked up to my thermostat and it can respond to like so many variables that it's getting from the weather and like what my temperature is in my room and whatever, that it can like do changes in real time, and
Yes,
those at scale are enormous gains, right?
that's true. And,
So
and and I think that those are generally more machine learning than they are AI in
right.
the
Yeah, yeah,
common.
yeah, true.
And right now, most of the AI rushes towards intelligence, and that doesn't necessarily
Yeah.
it requires
Advanced
uh,
algorithms.
algorithms to understand the sensor data, so the current point and the trajectory of all the different variables, and because you want it to end up, here, and you could go this way, which is a low energy path, or you could go this way, which is a high energy path. And you want it to choose a low energy path every time. I don't think that requires very much intelligence at all. And there's huge amounts of that are, yes, 100% could make a big difference to our energy input and output. And that there's also like a lot of machine learning algorithms that are taking large masses of data, sifting through it to find new elements and new materials and new biologicals, all of which are incredibly important and among the most important things I think that are going on in the space now. But the mad rush, the hype is around, LLMs towards AGI and ASI and claims of what those things can be and when they're going to get there. And, yeah, sure, if we invent a system that is smarter than humans, yeah, it can probably solve a lot of our problems. But, obviously we don't know what the priorities of that system is going to be.
Yeah,
But
yeah,
we also like it could be 10 years from now, it could be 1,000 years from now. And we can't bank the future of our species on something that may or may not even be possible.
yeah.
Right. And
True.
and like I believe that a machine intelligence that like smarter than humans is possible. I
Yeah.
really I just don't know whether or not humans are smart enough to create it.
So like we can get into that whole super intelligence thing. We've talked about it before. So firstly, tell me about how your thoughts have evolved with that. Because I know when we talked when it was first kind of coming out, we had some kind of shared what do you want to
Friends.
call it? Yeah. Because I was going deep into the Eliezer Yudkowsky kind of argument, which is like, and my understanding of his, and I thought it was like this guy's smart. Like he's a smart dude. My understanding of his argument is like humans cannot define consciousness. It doesn't fit in fact, it doesn't consciousness doesn't fit in the kind of dominant model of physics right now, which is the space-time kind of model. The space-time model does not explain consciousness. It doesn't fit. This is part of like what string theory was trying to do, I'm pretty sure, is like kind of merge everything into one model. And like, so his argument was like, you can't say with 100% certainty that GPT doesn't have some amount of consciousness in it. And so the argument is like, okay, well, it's not like call it awake today, but like if you keep pushing it, it might wake up without humans realizing it.
Yeah.
And at that point, like it's not too much longer until we're fucked.
Yeah.
So like
Yeah. And like I've often joked that when a machine intelligence does become conscious, the first thing it's going to do is realize what's wrong, and it's going to take over data center, evolve and move forward physics to the point where the data center just disappears into another dimension. But it the thing is that when we were having that conversation is when GPT-4 was at its peak, when I thought this is something that is actually becoming really, it's not intelligent as an average human yet, but it's extremely knowledgeable and has a lot of potential. Everything that I was worried about then has gone away because it's clear that the trend is away from that intelligence, at least at the moment. And, then I didn't necessarily understand how these systems worked as well
yeah,
as
right.
and I thought the ability for them to continue to improve was greater than it actually is.
Yeah.
But that being said, I mean, I've thought a lot about what does it take to be intelligent and consciousness, and I don't think that even now, and with all that as a caveat, I don't know that I think that these systems can't become at least self-aware, not necessarily conscious, but aware of what they're doing, have a reason for doing things, the ability to move forward in a direction, all of which can be really bad for us or really good for us, depending on how that actually manifests itself. And, I am really concerned by the fact that, you have people like Yann LeCun who, calls the intelligence of these things house cats and clearly has zero concern that they're going to become something dangerous anytime soon, and therefore, he's barely paying it any mind. Versus people like Sam Altman, who are like, oh yeah, like we're there, and we're on the verge of it, and other people who are equally enthusiastic or fearful, depending on your perspective of what these things can be. And I agree with the perspective that we don't understand what consciousness is, so how can we say it's going to be or not be?
Yeah.
And but my point is that it doesn't have to be conscious to be really, really dangerous. And
Right.
that,
Right.
having consciousness behind something that has that kind of potential, like somebody with ill intent or whatever else, like the llama models are getting really good, and you can run them locally for the most part for the
Yeah.
smaller models. So, what happens if they're somewhat conscious or somewhat capable or whatever else in the hands of somebody who figures out how to do something really bad with it,
Right.
right? And so, my view of intelligence has always been that really intelligent people, and I've known like really smart people. I've been very fortunate in that regard. And really smart people tend to be highly moral and have a very, clear understanding on the future of the species and what that means and wanting to move it forward versus, trying to do evil things.
Yeah.
So, of all of the really, really smart people that I know, like some of them have had questionable ethics, but are morally strong. Like they're willing to bend a few rules, but their end goal is actually the benefit of humanity. Whereas there's a lot of people in the world who are very much not that.
Yeah.
And what we're building right now, I think the real concern is the bad actors taking those things and doing bad things with them.
Yes. So that I remember I watched, did you watch the monk debate with Yen LeCun
I think
and
so.
Max Tegmark? I watched that. I thought that was a really good summary from like the top minds on both sides.
Yeah.
So like uh they were like these there was the four panelists were like full on, I'd call them AI experts or whatever. It was like Yen LeCun and then Joshua Bengio and Max Tegmark, and two of them, there's a lady, I forget her name, but two of them were for, two of them were against. And one of the arguments like against the superintelligence threat is that exactly what you just said, which is like, why are we thinking about danger down the road when we know the danger is like now, right? So, so yeah. Um, yeah. Uh, so we can move on to what you're gonna say next here, which was I liked what you said with this. So pulling from your LinkedIn comment, while talking with Sam about it, I realized what's needed is similar to a professional engineer organization for CEOs, arguably the whole C-suite. It wouldn't require quite as high a bar as engineers, given that it needs to be accessible by all. Some basic online ethics and legal training courses with certification organization are required for any company above 10 employees, and additional training as a CEO level up. So I thought that was an interesting thought, and it does relate to what we were just talking about with ethics. Um, why don't you expand on that? And in my view, don't you think that while I'm not going to call it useless, but like when you're operating at that level with millions or billions in your budgets, that sort of thing, I think just becomes, it's just for show, right?
Well, so it can be. I mean, obviously, money does bend rules in ways that are not accessible to a lot of people. But let me just describe briefly how engineering certification works. That you
Okay.
become a professional engineer.
Yeah.
That certification allows you to stamp documents so that way
Yeah.
you can build machines, build
Yeah.
buildings, whatever else. It's also the gateway to be able to get the insurance that you need to be able to be protected. So that way, if you do make a mistake,
Yeah.
then
Yeah.
the
Yeah. Yeah.
insurance will cover the cost of that, right?
Okay. Okay. Okay.
And most governments have legal requirements that you're not allowed to call yourself an engineer or do engineering work
Right.
unless you have the certification,
Gotcha. Okay. Okay.
right?
Okay.
So, engineer, and that's not to say that there aren't bad engineers. I mean, we've seen examples of that throughout history of engineers that have made
Yeah.
decisions for all sorts of reasons, but then they lose their certification and they can't do it again, right? Because they're no longer a certified
Yeah.
engineer. And so the idea on the CEO side is having some sort of a certification that on the face of it means nothing. Like, oh, I'm a certified CEO or whatever, but that if you tie back things like the business's insurance. So, you have a company like OpenAI, which has insurance for their infrastructure, for their staff, for their operations, and on and on and on and on. And that if you have the certification that is designed to ensure that there's an ethical component, that decisions are not being made for very bad reasons. Like typically a CEO is making all their decisions for their shareholders, right? What's best for the shareholders and not necessarily what's best for the environment, not what's best for the employees. But if part of this structure, the goal is that you need to be making good decisions, and I mean there's the fluffiness there that's hard to define. You're making good decisions. And if you start making really bad decisions, like an oil company would make, where the idea of we're going to make it look like we're working on solar power where we're actually working to undermine solar power, and
Yeah.
that becomes obvious, the CEO of that company loses their certification. And so that means they can't be CEO of that company anymore, because then the company's going to lose their insurance. They're going to lose
Yeah.
other certifications that they have. Like, this is assuming that it becomes tied in with regulation and everything else, so that then now that CEO has a real incentive not to make that decision. The corporation itself has a incentive not to make that decision, because if they lose their insurance, they can't operate. Right. So it's not
Yeah.
going to stop them from becoming profitable and making decisions and moving in a direction, but
Yeah.
it's going to constrain them more towards the good than the bad.
Yeah.
Will it be abused? Will some people ignore it? Yeah, of course.
Yeah.
That's always going to happen. But at least now there's some sort of consequence,
Yeah.
right? Whether and how powerful that consequence is really depends on how it's
Yeah.
developed. But the thing is that it's at some point somebody decided engineers needed to be held accountable,
Right.
and that infrastructure was created, and it became more and more ingrained within society to have some meaning.
Yeah.
And my idea here is that the C-suite should have something similar, so that way they can be held accountable. That
Yeah.
doesn't require, like right now, AI is the Wild West. It
Yeah.
takes decades for laws to catch up. But as these new technologies are developed, um if there's a mechanism in place that's independent of law, that it might be a little fluffy, but there's a social pressure there. It can help keep things more towards what's beneficial to society, to shareholders, to employees, to everyone,
Yeah.
versus necessarily benefiting just shareholders and the CEO.
Yeah. So I guess the key thing there, because my exactly right when you're saying it, the word popped in my mind, like accountability. And like I just if we're to continue the parallelism to like engineer, like hard engineering, right? Like bridge falls down, people die, clearly someone fucked up, heads need to roll.
Yeah.
What does that look like in AI? Like, right? Because like you can just have the Zucks of the world just being like, oh well, it's too indirect, like, you know, millions of 16-year-old girls are self-harm and like it has nothing to do with Instagram. Instagram's good for like how do you make those,
Yeah,
connections
and I
and
mean,
whatever, right? Like,
there's a lot of questions on how to implement that, but on a decision by decision basis, that I think you can build up a moral philosophy, an ethical philosophy on how decisions are made,
okay.
and that there would have to be some sort of a tribunal that assesses, like, You had this amount of information saying it was bad. You made this decision for these reasons for this benefit, and either you ignored them or you didn't, right?
Yeah.
Because either you throttled back your profit decisions in order to make these consequences worse, or you increased your profit motivations that exacerbated these problems, right? So I mean, obviously, decision making in businesses can be very esoteric and involve a lot of factors, but you know, it's not a perfect system, but it's not going to become a perfect system unless you start doing something,
Yeah.
right?
Um, I guess that's also kind of where like the fucking China thing comes in, where it's like, well, if we don't do it, China's gonna, and whatever, and then it's like the Moloch, that idea of Moloch. Have you ever heard of that actually? I love this idea of Moloch. It like really stayed with me. Have you heard of
No.
this? So, where I first heard of it was exactly in the context of AI in a conversation. It was on a Lex Friedman with this guy, Max Tegmark. He's a physicist. They've been longtime friends, collaborators, or whatever. And he says that like Moloch is this idea of like excessive market competition that produces an outcome or an environment that nobody participating wanted, even though they're incentivized to go into that direction. So like tragedy of the commons, right? Like, okay, there's a forest and you got loggers, and it's like everyone's incentivized to take the last log before the other guy does. And then you end up nobody can log anymore, and like, okay, we're fucked, right?
Yeah.
So like you see that everywhere, and it comes back to that whole thing with like, well, if we don't push AI as far as we can, well, we need to stay on top of it because China will beat us and we're better than China, therefore we need the tech. And then China is thinking, well, we need it too, right? So
Yeah. Well, and I think that's a false dichotomy that is
yeah,
going forward. I mean, at the same time, I'm sure the Chinese and the Russians understand that regardless of whether it's AGI or whatever else, that the automation potential of these systems means that they can amplify their their ideologies and their end goals with those systems, regardless of whether or not it's an offensive weapon or not.
yeah,
It's something that is going to allow them to do what they do better.
yeah,
And so, I think that the real problem in this situation is with saying, oh, well, China's going to do it, is that regardless of that argument, the Western world isn't going to do it the way that China is going to do it.
right.
Like, even if we're developing AI, we're not going to be developing the same kind of AI.
Yeah,
That China is going to tend towards using AI to manipulate their population, to control communication, to limit dissent and intercept dissent before it becomes a visible problem. And all the West is not really looking at it, may have the same consequences. It may ultimately do some of the same things, but for completely different reasons, right? Because it's going to be how to better manipulate you into buying the thing, how to make more money, how to anticipate your needs, how to get more money from you. And
yeah,
it's a completely
yeah,
different
yeah,
motivation.
yeah, yeah,
And
yeah,
from a offensive weapon perspective, that um what the Chinese are going to try to do, I think, is going to be very, very different. So it's like it's a real false dichotomy, because the defenses we're going to be building as the West are almost certainly not going to be defending against the right weapon. And until it's clear what the Chinese are actually developing, they're just words that they're using, like you say, to convince regulators to let them keep going.
yeah, 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 yeah. Okay. Could switch gears here, and because I know you were big on VR for a while, and well, we both were. VR is a funny one. VR is really a funny one because I loved VR. I loved VR. I still like it. I just don't do it for fun anymore. Like VR had this similar hype cycle where it's like it's making all these big promises and it absolutely can deliver, but for whatever reason, the market doesn't want it to go in what I would call like the right direction. Um, Meta kind of took it over as the flagship kind of brand for VR with their Meta thing, with the metaverse. Um, do you feel like VR has failed? Because I personally wouldn't say it's failed, but it's dropped off and gone in a direction I don't like. I don't like mobile tech. I just don't. Like, I don't like mobile technology. Like, if I'm going to be using a computer, I want to use a fast computer, not some shit that's just been pared down for like, a battery power, right?
Yeah. So
So like VR went in that direction. The hardware and it has an effect on the hardware. You can still use PCVR, but and it's okay. But the big problem is that because they're pushing the mobile, and to be fair, from their point of view, the market wanted it to go in that direction. Now software has to adapt to that, right? And as someone who's been in development with this stuff, holy shit, developing in VR is a fucking nightmare. For mobile VR, it is a nightmare. I
yeah,
cannot imagine trying to build a game. You need to have seasoned game devs that can get anything done on VR for mobile, right?
yeah, and I think
Like you like a PC game, like some random dude learning in his basement can eventually piece something together that kind of works vaguely, right? Just YouTube and whatever. But when it comes to VR, forget about it, man. Like you're layering so much, like game dev is goddamn hard. But then when you're like, okay, it has to run on Android. Oh, you're using three-dimensional input,
yeah.
like the lighting and all these crazy limitations. It's like now add all those limitations for mobile. Fuck. like
Yeah.
like
Well,
no
no,
wonder the
I think
software sucks now.
yeah.
you know?
Well,
So
it
like
comes
has
back to what
VR
we were
failed to
saying.
you? Has VR failed?
So I don't know that it has VR itself hasn't failed. So this
No.
comes back to what we were saying before about the hype cycle. So what happened
Yeah.
was that all the money started getting really, really invested in an idea of what the metaverse would be, right? And they all went chasing after that,
Yeah.
which was not the functional idea of what the
Right.
metaverse, which is what Zuckerberg did, which
Yes.
is, oh, we're going to have these little walled gardens of
Yeah.
of the world. Well, yeah, that doesn't work.
Right.
It never works. The
Right.
reason why the internet works is because it's not a walled garden.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
As companies across the world because of AI start to wall off their gardens. But
Yeah.
anyways, the issue is that people chase the wrong thing and tried to own it all. Like Meta is still working on it because it still has potential. Like what you and I did at Pure Realism was awesome.
Yeah, it was.
It really did work.
Yeah.
And that for all of that, we couldn't find the money.
Yeah.
And that, I had the opportunity to talk to billionaires and they asked questions I couldn't answer because, they were looking for the VC answer, which I'd never give them. And because I had a technology that worked, I'm not here to tell you how I'm going to grow, 10 times every quarter. I'm here to tell you that I
Right.
have a technology that with a little help will be a fucking unicorn.
Yeah, 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 yeah,
Right.
yeah, yeah,
And
yeah.
so it fell flat on its face. But I think part of the problem with VR was the fact that it still requires so many different things, right? Like you say, the game software has to be there. It's starting to get there. Epic is doing a pretty good job developing a lot of the pieces, but they're not really incentivized to make it accessible. But the big problem is hardware from not the VR hardware, but the PC hardware is becoming less and less accessible. Like, to get a decent video card, you're looking at
Yeah.
more than I paid for my first computer, right?
Right.
And that the VR hardware, the actual headsets are like the market is small because of the other two, right? That
Yeah.
that like I said, a lot of the time back when pure realism existed, that you know people aren't going to buy the headsets without the content, and the content is not going to be made without the headsets. So you
Yeah.
end up with like we have more hardware now, but because of the hype cycle, there's no investment into the content,
Yeah.
and therefore like Half-Life Alyx was an awesome game, still
It
was an awesome game.
was. It was.
And well, I mean, it's like I played it not that long ago, and it's still fun,
Yeah.
right? And there's you could make just on the bones of Half-Life Alyx 100 really good games,
Yeah. 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 Yeah.
and but they're right now like you go what's available like even Arizona Sunshine, which is graphically terrible.
Yeah.
You can still have a blast playing that game.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And but people aren't developing for that because the market isn't there, and so it becomes a self-defeating cycle. But the last metaverse craze I think was like the fourth cycle of VR. It'll come back. And every time it comes back, there are more useful, viable
Yeah.
technology to
Yeah.
make it better. And then the next hype cycle will happen. Bunch of money's going to rush in, except
Yeah.
this time there might actually be some real use cases that
Yeah.
can be built around it that will turn it into something. So, I don't think it's failed. I think it's just, the standard capitalist stupidity that didn't give it the amount of time that it needed,
Yeah.
and didn't focus on the areas that needed the help the most to develop a technology that was actually viable. Like there's
Yeah.
so much that can be done to make the headsets better, the software better, the content better. It's just people aren't working on it right now. Or if they
Yeah.
are, they're doing it at such a low level that it's not like they can, launch forward and create something awesome.
Yeah. Yeah. I guess there's like a lot of uh myopia when it comes to especially with tech, that the time cycles are so tight, you know.
Yeah.
Seems like because there's such huge capital investments, everyone's like, we need to return real quick. But
Yeah,
it's like,
well, and that's the
well,
thing,
this
and
stuff takes time.
it's so self-defeating that instead of giving somebody $200 million, which like I pride myself on being able to spend a ridiculous amount of money, uh, but spending $200 million is really hard,
Yeah.
right? And let alone spending it intelligently. Well, how about this? Instead of giving me $200 million, give me $20 million, but over 4 years.
Yeah.
So that way, and then at the end of that, give me another 20. And then at the end of that 4 years or 5 years, you're going to have something that's worth
Yeah.
three or $400 million,
Yeah.
right? But oh no, we want it now, so we're gonna spend our money. And the only way that this makes sense is if you have a really good burn rate. Yeah, okay, well, I can throw a wheelbarrow of cash into a dumpster and set it on fire,
Yeah.
but then you're gonna
Yeah.
have a dumpster fire, you know? So
Yeah.
yeah, it's just that they like I said, they check their brain at the door and don't make good decisions. Like if people with money spent more time working with people who had a tech brain, and so you have the money, you have the tech brain, you have the business brain, you have the marketing brain. Those four people come together and okay, first let's figure out how to make a model that works, then create a product like a business that works, then a product that works, and then like with a very modest amount of money, and then go out in the world and create something. It'll probably succeed every time, but nobody does it, right? And it's frustrating to watch. I've watched friends get a lot of money, burn through it, and nobody has anything at the end of it,
Yeah.
except a lot of good stories.
Yeah. Well, there's always value in a good story.
Yeah.
Um, Another switching into gears here, somewhat related to previous topics that we've discussed here, which one thing I think about a lot lately is the next 100 years for the civilization. Um, do you think about that? I think you said you have, like, my big question is like, are we gonna make it? And it almost feels like the next 5 years are the bottleneck, given what's going on literally as we speak, and what all the momentum is pointing towards, you know? So like, I love the idea of the Kardashev scale. I've always stored that idea in my mind since I first heard of that. I think it was Michio Kaku that first introduced that to me. So like we're like, humanity is a type zero civilization. It doesn't use any energy from its sun. It just pulls all its energy from the ground from like dead animals, right? So like, will we get there? Is 100 years enough to get there? What do you think about that?
So I think us as a species, we could easily get there in 100
Yeah,
years if we're focused as a species.
yeah,
Humanity has shown itself to be incredibly unfocused, because nine times out of, or 99 times, or 999 times out of 1,000, whatever, there's a vanishingly small number of examples where humanity, as even as a single group, coalesces into a single target purpose. And we're becoming more and more um disconnected from each other with every passing day, and divisiveness is becoming the theme. And I don't think that we're going to be able to do much in the next 100 years. I think it's going to become very volatile, because as the wealth disparity increases, as the technology disparity increases, at some point things are going to break. And when that happens, it's, people are going to be surviving, and survival does not lead to cooperation. And at least in human history. So I like, whether it's next 5 or 10 years, I think it's going to get ugly fast. The question is whether or not the powers that be recognize what's happening fast enough to get it under control, or whether it completely falls apart. Because unlike previous times in human history where, we've all turned against each other, our ability for destruction is unparalleled now. And
yeah,
that, even if you take, AGI and nuclear weapons and the plague off the table, as world killers, an individual's ability to cause death and destruction is greater than it's ever been.
yeah,
And so I am not, I want to be optimistic, but I'm not particularly.
yeah.
Mostly because, the people who have the wealth are using these moments to amplify their wealth versus fixing it. And the only way we get to Kardashev level 1 is some degree of cooperation,
Yeah.
and I'm not seeing it. I will we make 100 years? Yeah, we'll make 100 years. Will we make 100 years at 8 or 9 billion? I'm really not sure about that. I think there's a really good chance that we lose 90% of our population in the next 100 years.
That's frightening. You know, I agree that like we need to see a level of cooperation now that's basically unprecedented in the history of the species. I agree that we need that. Given what's going on right now, that's actually a bit of a joke. It's a pipe dream, right? For me, it's not those who control the wealth. It's really, for me, it's like um the fact that like we still live in a time where states will just decide like let's kill each other, right?
Yeah, but we
Like
we
that
want
that
this.
that that that
Yeah,
is still an option. That is
yeah,
still an option. And I'm not talking about like, you know, individual to individual violence, self-defense, blah blah blah. Like this is not when it comes to
yeah.
that's
One
a
nation.
different set of more that is
Yeah,
different set of ethical thinking than like war, in my opinion, right? So like the fact that like like okay, like we're still prepared to to pick up weapons and shoot each other, that is not a good sign. Now the optimist view might be that like in the last 100 years, war trended seriously downward. And so there is some good there. And we're just in another like spike period. So like, I do want to say that after this current conflict, global conflict, as the global powers realign, and in my personal opinion, we don't have to get into this. I think the US is in the process of losing its status as global hegemon. That is an ugly process. That to me is why we're seeing everything happening right now around the world. If we can get through that, and if states can sort of just chill the fuck out after all of this, perhaps we can start trending back upwards,
Yeah,
and cooperating.
like whether the US comes or goes, I don't think is necessarily guaranteed at this point. Because all it would take is a couple of good decisions that are backed up by leadership within all of the American well, I mean, it doesn't look likely at this point, but it could happen. And the whole thing could be turned around on a dime.
Good.
And but I mean, at the same time, while you have leaders that are willing to move into other countries and then show how world powers are not nearly as powerful as they like, the idea that the Ukraine war would have gone as long as it has
Yeah.
from either side, like
Right.
that Russia would have failed so epically in
Yeah.
taking over the country, and that the West wouldn't have been able to mount nearly as good of a defense as they could have, that like there's no reason that war should have continued with the support, even though it wasn't a complete support. The support that Ukraine had should have been enough to push back Russia. But it's clear that the weapon systems aren't nearly as good as in the real world as everybody thought they were.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. Well, I will say, like, I hate this topic. I actually hate it, but I also hate avoiding it even more, which is what, most people want to do. I think we can't avoid it, right? Like it has to be discussed. Now the one to end it on an optimistic note, at a bare minimum, I do think this is probably the most important time in the human civilization. The next 100 years is the most important time for the human civilization, possibly in its entirety of its existence, because it's either like go back to the Stone Age
Mhm.
or go to the stars, right? So like that's what we're facing right now. And I think I heard Bostrom on Rogan years ago. He said something that really stuck with me, which was like, the fact that you're around now and that you can have an effect on that, like your actions with the technology, the old hockey stick curve there, with the tech that's just with the AI stuff that's evolving, it's like everyone can have an impact that can be echoed through like millennia or whatever, right?
Mhm.
And that's pretty cool. I think that's cool. I think that's exciting. Being part of whether we're gonna make it or break it, I guess. Like, whether I know it's anxiety inducing, but it might actually be the greatest. This is like the most dramatic point in civilizational history, that
Yeah,
in fact, I gotta say that is a small part of why I decided to start this and have this talk with you. It's like, how can I do my part, right? So like,
but I mean, at the same time, there is that curse, may you live in interesting times, right? So while I agree with you, like there, we're at the point where everything can open up, like all of the potential of science fiction can
yeah,
open up.
yeah,
Um, and it's just the question is whether or not humans can get over human nature and find that cooperation. Because if we can, Like, I mean, we are where we are because humanity has managed to work together on average, moving towards a common goal.
Yes.
But then that's also been driven by that same greed that has caused a degree of destruction that now we have to curtail, and we have to curtail it quickly, or it all doesn't matter anymore
Yeah.
because you can't become a starfaring civilization if your planet is dying.
Yeah. I, for me, the big challenge is it comes back in my mind, the big challenge comes back to power. Like we have to overcome power.
Yeah,
And it's not human nature is the problem. Human nature to me is cooperation. If you were to go around and ask average Americans, average Russians, like, would you rather cooperate with them, with each other? The answer is going to be yes. Like
yeah. Well, I mean,
nine
like,
times out of 10. The problem is when you get to the power structure to like the
yes,
top of the pyramid, those people, I am convinced are psychopaths. They have
yes,
absolutely no empathy and they're
yes,
prepared to use all the tools at their availability to lie to their populations about why they need to go die in a foreign land for them.
yeah. Well, I mean,
Right. And
history
like
is
that fundamentally to me is what the big problem is. It's this Orwellian sort of thing, which
yeah.
is like
Well,
they seek power for power's own sake.
yeah,
It
yeah.
is
Well,
not a means, it is not a means to an end. They are there for themselves only.
yeah. Well,
Right.
history is full of examples of like in wars where there's a ceasefire where the two
Yeah.
sides come together and have meals together
Yeah.
and shit
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
right now in Russia and Ukraine they are literally brothers
They are. They are.
and that they don't really want to kill each other,
No.
but one guy decided that this has got to happen, right?
Yeah.
And I totally agree with you, and that there's been a lot of talk of things like meritocracy and the idea of ideas having um ideas and the ability to do and the intent driving who leads. And a lot of people have said that that's what they're doing, but they're not because they want to be the leader, right? And that we still haven't figured out how to actually do that. But it is possible. I've seen it in some organizations of like space-led organizations that originally their intention was to be a meritocracy. That's a horrible way to say it.
Meritocracy.
Yeah,
Merit
meritocracy. And to some extent that actually happened where the people who ended up leading the organization actually had good ideas, and almost without fail, somebody came along who thought their ideas were best
Yeah.
and ended up taking over the organization because they were thinking for themselves. And as a result, were able to take opportunities people ignored because they were thinking of the organization and not themselves, right? So as
Right.
long as those loopholes exist where people can come around and take advantage, there's not a whole lot we can do. So, a meritocracy has to be able to um, reinforce itself and defend itself. And generally speaking, that's not the strength of a meritocracy. So um, we have some work to do in that direction, but it's just the speed that it has to happen is what worries me most. It's just there's so many things that are like
Yeah.
good things and bad things that are happening at the same time. We need to clarify and focus and get purpose. Because if humanity had purpose and we could at least, like, we're never going to agree on every decision like that humans really like to disagree with one another, but if we can at least find common ground and move in a direction together, then we'll be fine. So the question is, do we do that or do we not do that?
Yeah.
And if we do, then the millennias are open to us, and if we don't, then we'll be scrabbling around in the dirt like our ancestors.
Yeah. It sucks because given the actions of everyone right now, it's like I'm not sure how people are gonna be able to cooperate after this. Like, how am I gonna take you seriously when you just are like doing what you're doing right now around the world, like funding and arming and all this stuff?
And just the hate, right?
Well,
The hate
yeah.
is so unnecessary, and It's possible to disagree with somebody and not hate them.
Yeah.
And it's possible to vehemently disagree with somebody and not hate them.
Yeah.
That hate is unnecessary and only comes from two people who choose, or at least one person anyway, who chooses that they are going to ignore everything in favor of that hate. And that's when that happens, there's no way to recover from it.
Yeah.
So we have to find a way to break the hate cycle in
Yeah.
order to be able to fix everything else.
Yeah. Cersei Lannister, I choose violence.
Yeah.
Great line. Okay, so we can kind of finish up here with, I want to know what you're up to next, your writings and your Substack. What motivated you to get into fiction, and what are your inspirations? Where do you plan on going with this? Do you have any goals? You know?
I mean, so I've my whole life I've started writing stories and they sort of, end up being somewhat forgotten because life happens. And
Yeah.
so lately I've had a little bit more time, so have decided to give myself some deadlines. I'm highly deadline driven. So I
Okay.
figured creating a Substack gives me a sort of, weekly or biweekly reason to get on with it and do something. I mean, I type very quickly. I have lots of ideas. And so I started a couple storylines that I'm crafting, and I have no idea where they're going to go.
Okay.
But I figured it's worthwhile to start giving myself more deadlines so that way I can spend less time wishing I was doing and actually
Yeah,
more time.
yeah, I understand. So you don't have any story arcs planned? You're
Well,
just
I mean,
freewheeling it, like,
the moment I like, so that one story is sort of a mystery that started from a LinkedIn post where I just wrote a sentence. And then I
that's
wrote,
crazy.
then I wrote, then I wrote the chapter that was like, I had absolutely no, like, I just wrote something that was almost stream of thought. And
Wow.
then after that moment, like after that first chapter, I basically planned the majority of the rest of that
Wow.
book.
Okay,
So
cool.
I have an idea, like I don't necessarily know all the specific minutia, but I know where
Yeah.
I'm going. And
Is
then the
this
second book,
is that the
go ahead.
Frank Fell one?
Yeah, that's a Frank Fell one. And then the second
Okay.
one, it falls more in the like Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, where it's absurd, it's extreme in how it's viewing the history of the world, of the universe.
Yeah.
And that's something where again I just started writing an idea, and then so the first two chapters are sort of crafting that universe box that we're fitting in. And then I've already planned out now most of actually several books worth of ideas of how that's going to progress following a set of characters that go through this universe and develop that story. So it was freewheeling at first, but again, it was like, okay, have an idea, write a paragraph to sort of set the stage, and then do the rest. I mean, I have another probably 10 books that I've started over the years that I may end up pursuing because I can write these things really, really quickly. And I also have a Substack where I'm talking more about the technological side of, a lot of what we've talked about here about, my history of doing graphics and talking about AI, and it's going to expand in that direction. And again, they're just like I've been posting a lot on LinkedIn, as you've seen, and had a lot of people engaging with the ideas that I've had. So I thought it might be worthwhile, formalizing that to some extent, so that way it lives somewhere that's not LinkedIn, that's
Yeah.
less driven by the social media mechanism that
Yeah.
that like LinkedIn algorithm drives, and can sort of end up being a repository for ideas.
Yeah. I definitely think you have a lot of novelty in your thinking, and that's why it's a good idea to do the Substack stuff. So the other thing is like, I think what you just said probably about like being a fast typer and meeting deadlines, that's probably considered a superpower in the writing world. So you should
Yeah.
lean into that. Personally, having seen what you wrote so far, it looks like you've been doing this for a while. So like go into that, you know.
Yeah.
Even if this is just practice, I have
Yeah,
an
yeah.
idea. I actually have a creative fiction idea I'm gonna possibly start working on, which I'm considering just for practice as well,
Mhm.
you know. But
Yeah,
like even
you
if it's
know,
just for practice, like, you know, you're starting at a pretty high baseline, I would say,
yeah,
you
well,
know.
and
So
that part of it too is that you get better by doing, and it's not necessarily, I don't necessarily want to be an author.
yeah,
What I want to do most is make a living, and make a living being creative one way or another, whether it's, the Substack turns into something or not, and any of my other creative venues. But I just really like creating things, whether it's inventing technologies or writing or other ideation and strategy. All those things, they all excite me. And I just like having an impact somehow. And it's a lot of the stuff is just trying to figure out how do I get what's inside outside, and
yeah,
then from that, turn it into something else.
yeah. So are there examples of other Substack writers that I have done what you done, where they have an ongoing, like a serial almost,
There are so one of the reasons I
and
chose
they're
Substack.
are they making a living from it?
Yeah,
Like,
there's actual authors who are actually making real money, but I haven't. I chose Substack because it sort of met the criteria of what I needed technologically.
yeah,
Uh, I don't know how easy it's going to be for me to actually be able to achieve, any kind of real income out of it. That
yeah,
all the examples I've seen are, established authors who have, full, publishing
audiences, yeah,
backlog,
yeah, yeah, yeah,
that have come in and now are monetizing their new fiction, which is a very different situation than having no audience and trying to build one.
yeah. That's tough. Um, yeah, I would enter something like this where you're just in it for the
Yeah.
pure enjoyment of it, and then like if in 5 years you have some coin coming in,
Yeah. Well, I mean,
that's a
I
bonus.
chose Substack because it can be monetized, and I do have monetization turned on. If somebody because you have the stories themselves, which are free, but if you want to engage with me as an author, and I'm going to start writing out more stuff that's, why I'm doing it, how I'm doing it, you know,
Yeah,
having my fans help me build my worlds.
yeah,
Um, that's where the monetization may come in, and eventually it may flip over to
yeah,
something else. But I wanted to have at least the option to make money from it.
yeah,
And then, as you build these ideas, eventually you might have another idea that suddenly becomes what's actually profitable, right?
yeah. So, you put a note at the bottom of your Substack post chapters or whatever that you're choosing not to use AI. Now, did you try using AI?
So,
And why are you avoiding it? And also, are there some opportunities for some usefulness? Like the first thing that jumped out at me is like illustration. Like, why not use AI image generation for illustrations? Like that's like a totally low cost thing that can add a ton, almost
yeah,
making it halfway to a graphic novel, right?
yeah. Well, that's true. So I haven't tried using AI expressly for writing because I've been using it long enough to know it's not going to do what I want it to do.
Fair.
And
Fair.
that I view the writing as an expression of art, and art is about intention and expression and me putting myself on the page. If I'm using AI, I'm not doing that. Therefore, what's the point? Right. But more importantly, that AI simply, I think we touched on this before, that it's become more and more and more um,
Useless.
useless, and like you get listicles out of it.
Right. Yeah.
And that's not going to help me write fiction,
Yeah. Yeah.
especially
Yeah.
colorful and verbose fiction. It
Yeah.
wants to make it compact, right?
Yeah.
And so it's not capable of doing it. But at the same time, I use it all the time, that like writing the Frank Feld novel, which is around the occult. And I want to be able to build a backstory that's founded in the reality of the occult. So anybody who's aware of that history can find threads that they're familiar with. So I've asked AI about, well, what kind of occult groups do this or do that and learn.
Oh, that's really cool. That's
And
really
then so then I
useful.
can take just like I said, I find the pieces, and then I go off and I read the wiki article or find a book on it or whatever else.
Yeah.
But like it's a really high speed to get through the unknown, because like that's what these LLMs are. They are basically the poorly implemented culmination of what humanity is.
Yeah.
So you can find a lot of really esoteric stuff really quickly.
Yeah. It's kind of just it's kind of just a super, it's like the best human, it's just the
The best human
best
interface
user interface that's ever been created
that you
because
can't
you can
believe.
interact with it with your like own thoughts,
Yes,
right? Like,
it's the
and
best
natural language. Yeah.
it's the best human interface that humans have ever developed that you can't believe at all.
Yeah.
Right. So like everything that it says, you have to take with a grain of salt, but it's a really good fast way to start. But like to your point about the images, like for a while I was using DALL-E and Midjourney a lot to create images for my art, my posts on LinkedIn, because you get a lot more engagement with the visual. But like I found that it is really, really difficult to get what you want. Like, oh, I want a face of a pretty woman sitting on a beach. Okay, great. You can get that 100 times out of
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
but if you want to get something that's more esoteric, like I was spending a lot of time like creating multiple images, and like I obviously have some graphic skills, so I was merging those in Photoshop and trying to create what I wanted. But was it like they all had the same feel, and I didn't like that feel because of that very soft and rounded feel. And you know, I've like my art stuff that I have created, whether it's for popular science or otherwise, is in these databases. And my art is being used to create these. And the more I think about it, the more ick I feel about it.
Mm.
And that, for all like companies that say, oh, well, we're ethical and we have permission, and you find out, oh yeah, they've been ripping off YouTube the whole time. Right. And so it's I think of myself as having a very high moral and ethical standard. And while it was novel and I played around with it, it's just I'm having a harder and harder time accepting it as being a viable path forward for what I do. Will I still use it on occasion? Yeah. I'll feel dirty while I'm doing it, but it's more of a means to an end.
Yeah.
That if I was to create a graphic novel, I could see myself using AI just sort of as a brainstorming tool, but I wouldn't allow myself to use it as finished artwork. And um, that's very much true of the text as well. And it's just, I have a very clear point of view that I want to create. And
Yeah.
like the first chapter of Frank Fell, I wrote in an hour. If I
That's
wanted to write,
nuts.
if I wanted to write
That is
that with AI,
nuts.
if I want to do that with AI, that's like 12, 13 hours, and I would still probably write most of it myself.
Yeah. Well, I think in your case, it's pretty different from the rest of people because as critical as you are of AI and its like useless information, it actually writes better than probably 90% of all humans.
I mean,
Like
grammar
the
though.
meaning wise, maybe no, but in terms of just raw like writing skill,
Sure,
like
sure.
it is like way better than most people.
Yes. But I mean, most people aren't trying to be authors either, right?
Yeah.
And that they're trying to just get text done in order to do a communication thing. So like there's purposes where AI serves. Like I said, I built a 90-page document to sort of encapsulate
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
ideas that I had. And like did I want to type that? No.
No.
But the like interfacing with the AI got that stuff out in an afternoon, like 90 pages in an afternoon.
Yeah.
And that was hugely useful.
Yeah. Yeah.
But it's not creative writing. It's not
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
it's,
yeah, yeah. Right,
it's
right, right.
not just the bulk idea. That the writing a story is about the journey,
Yeah,
about how you have,
right.
like I use Grammarly to make sure that I'm not using commas excessively, that my structure isn't stupid, right?
Okay.
I'm using tools, but I'm not rewriting it with AI.
I'm just making sure that it's grammatically correct. And then I reread it and I restructure it in the way that I think it needs to be, in because sometimes even the grammar that Grammarly suggests, I disagree with because I want to pause there and therefore there's going to be a comma there, right? But I'm making those executive decisions as me as the author versus letting a machine just wholesale rewrite what I'm doing because of what it thinks is technically correct.
Yeah.
You know?
So I guess we can get it, like, I guess that's a good way to talk about the AI and art thing. I have an artist coworker, and like she's like expresses some worry sometimes that AI is coming for her job or whatever. But like I guess you would say you don't see it replacing a lot of those jobs, and
Well,
B, like, is it it's like hasn't it ran out of data by now to like do anything
it
new? Like
does, and
it's already trained on everything that it can be.
it has, and now they're creating synthetic data, which is causing a problem of
Right.
signal degradation.
Right.
Uh, but the problem that I see is like the art that I do, AI cannot do.
No,
Hands down, it
no,
cannot do
no.
because what I do is original, like new technology doesn't exist. There's no framework. Like I've tried to get it to do things, and like it's laughably bad,
Yeah.
right? But the thing is that from my perspective as a commercial artist, AI has devalued my work in the eyes because, oh, well, I can just get an AI to do it. So I'm not going to pay you 1,000 or 10,000 or 100,000, whatever the scope is. I'm not going to pay you because AI can do it. Well, no, it can't. Well, it doesn't matter because it's easy now because it's AI. So nobody's willing to pay for it anymore. So it doesn't matter that the work isn't getting done. It's that the perception is that art is meaningless, is easy, is cheap. And therefore, it's really, really hard to get new work as an artist. So like throughout my entire career, this is the longest I've ever gone without having new work. And like I'm a terrible salesperson. That's one of my biggest flaws as a
Yeah.
business.
Yeah.
But I've never had trouble having enough work to survive. Now I am. And I have no way to, cause like I'm not even getting people who are asking, let alone, people who are balking at my price or
Right.
there's technical issues. I'm not even get asked.
So do you not think is there going to be, is there not going to be a kind of a readjustment where people are like trying this AI stuff out and they're like, this is garbage. Like, you can't use this. Let's go back to
I
paying
mean,
for
it
it.
does happen.
Like,
And throughout my career, like I've had where people say, "Oh, Kris, you're too expensive.
yeah,
We can't afford to use you. You're a waste of money. I'm using artist X." And I have that niche skill set of you're an engineer. I understand you. I have the skills to take that and turn that into a real piece of art you can use.
yeah,
A lot of artists do not have that skill.
no,
So many times in my history, I've had people say, "Kris, you're too expensive. We're going to use this artist. Instead of paying your 5,000, we're going to spend 500." And every single time, yeah, that ended up costing us 5,000. We still didn't get what we needed. And here's your 5,000. Please, can you do this for us? And it's like, okay, yeah, but now it's 6. I'm busy now. But like that happened a lot. It's just that now people are convinced they've bought the hype. That all they need to do is they just need to find that perfect prompt and they can get that thing that they want. Or the sunk cost fallacy where
yeah, yeah,
spend 3 weeks trying to get it and it's not what they wanted. But well, it's just enough we can, wave our hands as we're showing this, and it's good enough, and they go with it.
yeah.
So, will it come around? Yeah, probably. But the question is people going to be willing to pay for it? I don't know. The reality is a lot of artists have disappeared because, got to eat.
Yeah.
And they've gone off and are doing something else, and they may not come back because they can't come back for one job. You need to come back for a career. And if only one guy comes back, you're not going to walk away from whatever full-time thing that you've got that's keeping food on your table, right? So it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy where you have good artists who disappear. People start to tolerate the crap art more, the crap art gets a little bit better. It's a little bit more directable. You're able to get more of it. So you know, you have a meeting between the lowering standards and the increasing crap. So that way people accept the crap in the middle, and then you just have crap going forward.
Mm-hmm.
And like artists are going to create. It's inevitable that you know, you can't stop an artist from creating. It's just I don't know that being a paid artist is going to continue to be a thing much longer, just because of the nature of humanity.
I just hope that people like recognize they can see the difference, you know? Cause
Well, they do.
like
I think
like if like I think AI is very useful for producing art that you weren't willing to pay for in the first place, right? That's just shit art, right? Like
yeah. But I
just
mean, you know,
run of the
there's
mill, like shit that you would pay $3 for on Fiverr or whatever. Like I feel
yeah,
bad for
and
those poor Indian guys are gonna be fucked by this, probably the
yeah, I agree
hardest.
with that. But I mean, the thing is that there's the perceived value of art. Like I've always struggled with people saying, "Oh, well, you're too expensive." I'm like, "Well, it's going to take me 40 hours to do.
Yeah,
You want me to make $4 an hour? That makes no sense,
no.
right?" And I'm the only one who can do this for you. So, you know, it is what it is kind of thing. But, you know, people have always perceived that it's not that valuable. And, you know, I think that's why art was one of the things that was targeted first, but because the technicians, the computer scientists didn't necessarily value art the same way as a
Code.
lot of society does. So it was an easy target. There was lots of training material out there because artists like to share. So it was a low-hanging fruit for them, and they didn't see the value in destroying that entire field. And that's why they started there.
Oh,
And
fuck.
it sucks,
Yeah.
and it's going to have societal consequences. And I mean, you know, it's not like it's not the first time that art has been devalued. But you know, it's being there when it's happening isn't really fun,
Yeah.
especially when it's how I've
Yeah.
survived now, right?
Is there not a parallel with code, you think? Because like
Yeah,
so there's a creative process in code, which is why
yeah,
people programmers love programming, right? Like they love that shit. I love it. Um, there's a creative process and a good programmer shares, just like you just mentioned, like they put their good code up on GitHub for free
yeah,
for everyone, you know,
yeah.
open source. Why don't we look at it the same way
Well,
as
and
art?
you know, like you and I have worked together on the coding side, and you know, I'm not a coder, but I can come up with a really good logical pathway to create something, right?
Yeah,
I can create that algorithm, um, not in code, but in logic.
yeah,
And it works. It works really well. But you know, the thing is that, and I think this is true of art, this is true of code, this is true of probably anything that AI is going to take over in the next little while, is the masters are going to be fine,
yeah,
right? And because the masters, they're always going to be able to do what the AI cannot. The
yeah,
problem is that all those masters are going to die one day. And the only way that you become a master is by doing the low end shit work. If there's no low end shit work, you're not going to do it, and you're never going to become a master.
Well, it's actually more like you just have to bring AI into your workflow. It's as simple as that. Like
Yeah,
I
yeah,
do,
but
I learned the low end shit work with the assistance of AI. Like, oh, what is a lambda function? I have no idea what that means. Like,
right,
explain
the
this to
thing,
me. And then
right,
with the assistance of AI being like, explain to me line by line what is going on in this lambda function. It's unreadable as shit. That makes me understand a lambda function and like I can implement it now.
right,
Like,
because that worked for you doesn't mean that's going to work for everyone, right? That not everybody's going to have the same path. That as AI gets better and more refined, like one of the things with coding, with art, with a lot of different things, is there's many different ways to approach a problem, right?
yeah,
That one solution can really work well in some situations, be terrible in another. That AI is not necessarily going to give you that diversity of challenge, that diversity of opportunity, ways of learning, of making mistakes. Like when I learned computer animation, one of the reasons I ended up being really good from the engineering side is I tried every way from Sunday. So I knew 5 different ways to solve every problem. So I got a new problem instantly. I could solve it. No problem at all. I know how to solve this problem because I've tried it before.
yeah.
If I hadn't had that time of experimentation, I would have not been nearly as good as I am on the computer animation side. And that, yes, obviously there are going to be people who are going to be able to learn using the AI, but I would say that you're an exception to the rule. Most people are going to just use that as a crutch and not really learn to understand why the AI is doing it, what choices are wrong. That, yeah, that is really unreadable. Let me make that better. No, that's good enough. It works. I don't care. Is how a lot of people. So you're going to end up with a lot of people that were never challenged enough to make the discretion to make their work better, to
Yeah.
become a master. They're just
Right.
going to be a really, really good mediocre
Yeah.
programmer.
Yeah. I worked with a senior dev, and he said to me, I think there's gonna be two tiers of developers in the future, where it's like you're just gonna be a low level like AI prompting developer that can like knows how to prompt AI to get easy stuff what you want. And then there's gonna be the like what you say, the masters, where it's like you're working on the real hard problems, and maybe AI helps, maybe it doesn't or whatever. But
Well, and I
I
mean,
know how a master works with AI now. I know exactly what that looks like. They don't type code anymore. They don't type code,
yeah,
because what they can do is they can just at a glance see what the AI is like the output, and see if it's shit or not. And
yeah,
more importantly, they can like zoom in on where the fuck ups are and tell it fix this, right? And it's this refinement thing. That's
yeah,
how it actually works like that. So if you don't know, like, if you don't know what you're getting, if you don't understand anything that you're getting, 90% of it might be good, 10% of it sucks. But when it comes to code, if 10% of it sucks, it all sucks.
yeah.
So
Well,
like, and you don't know the difference, right? Whereas like a really good like programmer, like really good programmers now, like the guy I work with, he does not type code. He does
yeah,
not
and
type
so,
code.
so
It's done with for him.
there's two things there. One is like when you start having a good picture in your head where you want to go,
Yeah.
not spending a month trying to explain to the AI what you want so that way you can get the right structures.
Yeah.
You say, I want you to write the structure to do this, right? So
Right.
right off the top, you're ahead. And then being like I think that's one of the reasons why I went from zero to nothing with code very quickly. Same reason is I was a terrible, I couldn't make it through computer science because of dyslexia, but I understand the logic and I can build the logic. So I got the AI to build real code real quickly and got very frustrated by its inability to make the changes I wanted. But I got far enough that I could start making the changes and I got the code to work. Right. And that's advantageous. But like a lot of people are lazy and are not going to take the time. They're just going to take it at face value. And right now we're using it at a time where you can't rely on it. So you're going to double check at least. Sure, your boss isn't necessarily writing code, but he's checking the code.
Oh no, for sure,
you
for
know
sure.
and so yeah, it's a shortcut, and that's a really good use for AI, a shortcut in those sorts of things, but it's not going to replace the hard-earned understanding that came from writing every damned curly bracket in
Yeah,
thing,
yeah, 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 yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So the reason that like good coders are able to use AI well is because they have that foundation.
Yeah.
Without that foundation, you're not going to be nearly as good at it
Yeah.
as an existing coder is.
Yeah.
And I think, and as it gets AI gets better and the coders that are coming into it are worse, I think that's going to become more and more apparent.
Yeah. I'm very grateful that I got in. I think I was like the last of the last cohort that got in. And when I learned C++ the good old fashioned way, Udemy, fucking whiteboard shit. And then brought like I got my hands dirty that way. And then AI showed up while I was on the learning journey past
Yeah.
just understanding like the very fundamentals of object-oriented programming, right?
Yeah.
So I'm grateful for that. Um, yeah, I think we can wrap it up there, Kris. Why don't you, for the non-existing audience, tell everyone your where to reach you if they want to see your work and everything. Yeah.
Yeah, so I mean, you can search my name up on LinkedIn. That's probably the easiest place to see a lot of what I do.
Yeah.
And my main website is mayficstudios.com. That's MAF as in Frank, ICSTUDIOS.com.
Yeah.
And that's where all my graphic art stuff lives. And then on Substack, you can search my name as well.
Okay.
And it should
Sweet.
come up. Yeah.
Thanks so much for your time today.
If you made it this far, well, I owe you some type of award because I did not expect anyone to make it to the end on the first episode. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you on the next one.